Hey Laowinners, this is ADVChina here with another video, and why am I on a rooftop? Well, that's because in the previous video where I talked about 5 things that you can do in China, kind of debunking China as this crazy gulag, communist, you can't do anything place, I actually went up on top of a random roof, just like I did now, to show that you can do that, and it's pretty cool. It's a nice little perk of China. But today I'm here to talk about 5 things that you absolutely can't do in China. I'm going to try to avoid the very, very obvious stuff. I'm going to talk about the stuff that you might want to know before you come here, or before you travel here, or move here, or whatever you want to do. So the first thing I'm actually going to cover is number 5, and that is weed. Now, smoking weed in China, a lot of people probably realize that as a one-party communist state, all drugs are illegal here, but the difference is that the way it's perceived and the way that it's actually cracked down on. Despite 4th century Taoist alchemists using cannabis in old texts as a pain reliever and all kinds of traditional Chinese medicine, in 1985, the Chinese government actually classified it as a dangerous narcotic. So any possession or use of marijuana in China is completely illegal. Now, the problem actually comes down to drug education. Now, drug education in China is very, very lacking. Although there's billboards and all kinds of school texts that the kids learn in school about different drugs, everything is lumped together. So marijuana is classified the same as heroin or meth or any of the nasty stuff that actually leads to addiction and violence and things like that. So a lot of people, with the current climate of legalization in America or kind of decriminalization of marijuana in different countries, a lot of people think that China's probably going the same way, or maybe they don't even think about it in that respect. Maybe people just have a feeling that smoking weed is just a norm. It's a normal thing. But in China, it's actually worse and worse and more seriously cracked down than ever before. The funny thing is a few years ago, a lot of foreigners and Chinese people alike that wanted to dabble in marijuana could actually get away with smoking it in public because no one knew what it looked like, no one knew what it smelled like, and if anyone asked, they just said it was special American tobacco. Nowadays, they're actually trying to crack down super hard, and you'll actually see a lot of celebrity cases like Jackie Chan's son going to prison, and a lot of foreigners in Beijing and Shanghai and some big cities will actually be in a bar and they'll close off the doors, they'll send in the Chinese equivalent of the DEA, enforce a urine test on these people, and you either go to jail, you pay a fine, or in some cases you can get deported. There have also been high-profile cases of foreigners and Chinese people who have trafficked marijuana and have been executed. So it's more serious than ever here, and I would advise, no matter what you feel about the legality of marijuana, it's not okay here in China. It is being cracked down upon, and it's taken very, very seriously by the government. Small possession can carry up to 20 years in jail and forced rehabilitation, whereas in most cases with foreigners, possession or use will result in deportation. Number 4 is the internet, something you won't be able to use here because China's internet might as well be called an intranet. It's completely blocked off from the rest of the world, and although when I first came here, most stuff was not actually blocked. Now, the party is cracking down more and more on the internet freedom in China, but the problem is everyone asks me, how the hell do I get my videos up online? Well, the answer to that is a VPN, or a virtual private network, although recent news says that that might not be true in the future, and everything might be blocked, and VPNs might become illegal. Check out the video on that here. So, if you come to China, don't expect to use things like Facebook, Google, YouTube, Twitter, Pinterest, Snapchat, and many more. There's rumors that actually 70% of the outside internet outside of China is blocked, but there's no way to quantify this because things go up and down all the time. It is up to the central government here to block and allow things. A lot of people ask me, how do Chinese citizens actually put up with this sort of ban? The quick answer to this is that most people don't actually care. And the first reason for that is actually most Chinese people don't speak English. So they're not participating in these global or international conversations if they can't speak the global language. Number 2, the ban has actually led to something very, very special for China, and that is homegrown or domestic versions of every app or website that you can think of back home. So it's not like they're lacking. Facebook, people don't need to use Facebook because they have WeChat. People don't need to use YouTube because they have Youku. People don't need to use Twitter because they have Weibo. So all of these homegrown Chinese domestic apps kind of take care of all those problems. However, it doesn't mean that those domestic versions are just as good or better. But if you don't know any better, then they're good enough. So despite most Chinese people not really caring about this huge ban on all these foreign websites, the foreigners who live here and also the English-speaking, tech-savvy Chinese people are quite upset about the potential ban of VPNs, and they're definitely affected. Number 3 is sarcasm. Now, this might sound a little strange because we've all heard about the Soviet Union jokes about how Russian people don't have a sense of humor, but that's more to do with communism and their culture, and here it's a little bit different. Now, China definitely has a sense of humor, but sarcasm in English, or the way that an American or British or English-speaking person would tell jokes, is a little bit different than Chinese people do. China's already a really indirect society, and the way you communicate with someone in terms of face and societal values if you're using sarcasm to get your point across, it would be really, really convoluted. That's not to say that China doesn't have sarcasm, they just have their own brand of sarcasm. For example, there's a tradition of telling half sentences, half-finished sentences. If I say 脱裤子放屁, that means I take off my pants to fart, a completely meaningless action. For example, if I was washing my car in the rain, it would have no use. And that's kind of the humor that they use. The problem with sarcasm, especially in America, is that it's so influenced by pop culture that there's no way a Chinese person would be able to grasp that, even with a completely fluent level of English. It's not all about intonation, like, wow, the weather's great today. So it's not really fair to say a culture is completely unfunny, because I do hear that a lot about people that come to China. They say, oh, Chinese people don't have a sense of humor. It's just that you don't understand their sense of humor in Chinese, and they probably don't understand your sense of sarcasm in English. Also, there is no actual word or translation for sarcasm in Chinese. The closest I could find was waku, and every time I try to explain that to someone in Chinese, they don't actually grasp what's going on. It's completely mistranslated. So the next time you try to use sarcasm in China, you might be met with puzzled looks, confusion, or maybe even anger. Number 2 is gambling. Now, in 1949, the Communist Party of China actually completely banned gambling for the first time, and that meant something that Chinese people absolutely loved was completely illegal, and it still carries the same punishment as it did back then. Now, despite the law, I have never seen more gambling in my entire life than when I came to China. Chinese people absolutely love to gamble, from Mahjong to poker nights to illegal casinos to video machines. All of these things exist in China, but they exist illegally. A trip to China would not be complete without walking through the streets at night and hearing that kind of familiar shuffling of tiles at a Mahjong table. And all ages tend to play it, typically older people, but usually money is being gambled away. Now, it can be down to like 10 cents that they're throwing around, but a lot of people can go into severe debt. China actually has a huge problem with gambling addiction, and although there's no kind of concrete statistics for that, you actually see that around. One of my really, really good friends in China actually succumbed to his gambling addiction and ended up paying off kind of some really shady people over a long period of time, because gambling in China is run and managed by people that are not directly involved with the government, right? Because it's illegal. Now, China actually has a legal outlet for people that want to practice a little gambling, and there's 2 kinds of lotteries here. There's the China Welfare Lottery and the China Sports Lottery, which you can find in pretty much every town in every district of every city. Now, this is just run like a state lottery back in America, so that's not too shocking or anything, but the prevalence of gambling in China is actually quite surprising. And Macau, which is a former Portuguese colony that is now under the ownership of China, is allowed to carry on with its old legal system, so gambling is still allowed and has been traditionally used for people in China to go have fun. They're allowed to keep their casinos open, and it's a huge hotbed for mainland Chinese tourism, for people that want to go gamble away their money. Actually sees 5 times more profits per year than Las Vegas. It's actually the biggest gambling place in the entire world. I always love visiting there. I'm not a huge gambler, a casino man myself, but it's always funny to see these rich Chinese people walking around with sacks of cash throughout the street. But perhaps the biggest source of gambling in mainland China is online gambling. Now, things like WeChat and Alipay have made it so convenient to send each other money that gambling is just going crazy online. If you go on a lot of Chinese websites, there will be these pulsating, kind of like rave-like flashing ads everywhere for gambling online. And a lot of people lose a lot of money on these sites because half of them are scams. It's not regulated by the government. They're fly-by-night operations, and a lot of people are affected by this. But that is probably the biggest source of gambling here in China. Number 1 is the biggest one and probably the most commented on and talked about abroad, and that is protests and the freedom of speech. Now, not only China, but every one-party state around the world has always had a difficult relationship with public assembly. Now, in China, it is no different. You cannot go down the street and form a big group of people and talk about sensitive issues and hang up a placard and have all kinds of slogans and stuff like that. It is just not allowed. It's fully illegal. And despite the law existing that actually allows public assembly and protest, you actually have to register with the government for your topic of protest. They have to go over everything and approve it, and then they tell you when and where you can actually do it. And this is a selected few topics, so you can't just randomly go around and complain about what you want to. There's a few that I actually know of. If there are any countries in the news, like international news, that have pissed off China at any point in time, countries like Japan come to mind, then oftentimes Chinese people will be allowed to form assembly and actually have a public protest. Also, sometimes the building management is not quite up to snuff, and they actually have an entire department here in every local government that deals with the protests and organizes the protests for people that have complaints about their building. Another thing that people often protest about are factories that are polluting the local area. So maybe a factory making plastic has been polluting the local river, which is killing the fish and affecting the local populace. Oftentimes they'll go to their government and appeal and say, we need to protest about this, and it will be granted. The government gets incredibly nervous with a large assembly of people. So if I was to go down to Washington, D.C. and have a racially motivated protest like Black Lives Matter, for instance, or protest my government and say, I'm not a fan of the US government and I'd like to impeach the president, you would never be able to get away with something like that. Here, it's deemed highly sensitive, highly controversial, frowned upon by the local populace, as well as completely illegal. And pretty much every attempt in the past of having a religious type of protest or protest that has criticized the government, local or central, has been quelled immediately. However, a huge misconception is that Chinese people are just not allowed to talk with their friends or in a group of people about sensitive issues, and that's just not the case. Chinese people can, amongst themselves, talk about everything that they want to. It's just when it goes online, when it goes on media, when it becomes a large group of people that gets out of control is when the government gets nervous. I hope you enjoyed this video, guys. If you liked it, please go downstairs and hit the like button. It really helps me out. If you want to see my videos pop up in your feed so you know when one's going to come out, hit that little bell button next to the subscribe button. And don't forget to check out my friend Prazi's video where he talks about being homesick in China, what you can do about it, and kind of our experiences being in China for so long and being away from our family so long. Super interesting conversation that we had. Come here.
You're gonna let me say your time?
Yeah, duh. You can say it, dude.
What is it?
Thank you so much, Laowinners.
Thank you so much, Laowinners.
I'll catch you on the next one.